All right, afternoon, everyone. It's THCB gang time. I'm Matthew Holt. It's October the 31st, Halloween, particularly scary, although we didn't dress up today. I did find the photo from 4 years ago, which is up on LinkedIn of everyone dressed up. There were 6 or 7 people in costume, which was quite a feat. It's also the last THCB gang before a certain election in a certain country starting up, which I guess ends on Tuesday rather than, the voting part ends on Tuesday, and we'll see what happens next. I haven't actually got through got around to voting yet, but I've got my ballots slipped on my desk. So on with me today, 4 great people. Some haven't been on for a while. I'm delighted to have them all back. Jeff Goldsmith, who has been on recently from Health Futures Inc. Robin Farmanfarmaian, or as we're now calling her, Princess Robin. As we discovered, she was actually married at one point to a Persian prince. Jane Sarasohn-Kahn, speaker, author, wrote the book called The Patient CEO a while ago, and does a lot of entrepreneurial work as well. Jane Sarasohn-Kahn, my old friend from Think Health, and Fard Johnmar from these days running the Farmaging project. All right. Hi, everyone. Great to see all of you. So glad that you're all back with me on TCB Gang. And we're gonna split this up. We're gonna talk a bit about healthcare and what's going on in healthcare, and I have a couple of things. I'm sure you guys have all got some ideas as well. And then we're gonna spend the latter part of this talking about the election, who we think's gonna win, what's gonna happen if depending on who wins, and how many of us are gonna move back to New Zealand or Italy and Jane, or Belgium in James' case, or what happens if the wrong side wins. So let's go around. I'm going to start with one thing. I saw Bob Wachter on Monday night, who many of you know from UCSF. And Jane used to hang out with in Europe when she was interrailing, if I remember.
Oh, when we were very young, yes.
Very young,
Picked him up
exactly.
on a train when he was a junior at Penn, and I just graduated from Michigan. That's a long story.
Yeah. Anyway, and he, and I mentioned that we were talking about the first paper that's come out criticizing ambient AI. And I said, oh, I remember you gave a talk in like 2011 or 12 when like the first paper came out saying that EMR systems were actually bad for quality and actually were killing. I think it was I want to say University of Michigan or Cincinnati or somewhere. There was an install, or was UPMC or somewhere. There was an install of a system that was used for kids, and more kids died than didn't when they had the EMR install. And so we're getting the first things talking about the problems with ambient AI, and there's been some back and forth about that one. And whether the whisper technology that a couple of the AI systems, the ambient AI systems are built on, is hallucinating, whether that's dangerous, and whether you should be using ambient AI. And Bob said to me, look, we're not comparing this to, what ought to be the perfect case. We're comparing it to what actually happens, which is, at the moment we have people physicians doing pajama time and trying to remember what they was said in their notes at 11 p.m. at night and what have you. So that's one area that we can perhaps chat about. But let's go around. I will start with you, Jane, as you're on the top of my screen, and say, what have you been looking at recently?
I've been thinking a lot about mental health and telehealth and what could happen by December 31st or not, depending, and it's politics, sorry, but it's really on my
Or
mind
electoral
now.
politics, and not a lot of votes going on.
Yeah,
The
no,
show thing.
I'm thinking about what happens to virtual care and especially related to mental health, which was one of the few gifts we got out of COVID, dropping of taboo, access to scaling therapy where it needed to go. And I'm really concerned about that right now.
Yeah, I have a couple of interviews in the can I did a health last week with mental health companies, and that they are starting to scale. They are starting to do some stuff, and
Oh,
there is some interesting activity and understanding about what's going on in the world of virtual mental health. And it's the one
yeah,
place where we have built a kind of health 2.0 digital health system separated from the
yeah,
incumbents who we were discussing before we turn the video on.
yeah, gathering
Robert,
evidence
okay,
for it too.
sorry,
Gathering evidence for its
absolutely.
viability and outcomes, especially for kids and older people. I mean, it's one of the areas we actually can point to.
Yeah,
So
it's also an area where I believe AI could have a big impact very quickly, but we'll discuss that later as well. Robin, what have you been up to? You're giving a hang on before you say what you're up to. Tomorrow morning you're giving a keynote at Stanford. Tell us a bit about
Yes.
that what that's all about, and then tell us what else you've been looking at.
So this is for Stanford Healthcare, and the conference is specifically around the NICU, the newborn ICU.
Sure.
But my keynote itself is on much bigger to the greater of the entire system. And so what are we doing in adults that we could potentially pull in and do something like that within the NICU? And so that one, it starts at 9 a.m. It goes till 3 p.m. I'm on in the morning. And most of the day is really people brainstorming new solutions for, newborns. Now, what I've actually been working on, in addition to all my keynotes, I have one in Miami on Tuesday, too, if you want to come to that one.
That sounds better
I
than
co-founded.
That's pretty quicker to get there for me than the drive from Marin County to Stanford. Pretty quick to get to Miami.
You might have to fly to Miami, but that one's for senior living facilities. So, I do the NICU and then the senior living facility, which is fun. But I've co-founded a number of things this year. One is a group on an independent AI committee that really is there to influence government regulation. And so I'm starting a company around that. And then the second one that is almost going into beta is an AI-based medical scribe. Ambient computing.
We'll talk more about that because I know Jeff has been wandering around that space for a while as well. Fantastic. Well, great to have you on, and looking forward to hearing more about that. Fard, you're doing FemAging these days, but what else are you up to? Well, maybe that is what you're up to. Tell us what you're up to and what you've been looking at.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a big focus. So, as you know, and thanks always for your support, Matthew. It's always great. And Jane, you participated in our study that we did back in 2023. But basically, the FemAging project, for those who don't know, is it started out focusing on the health needs of women over the age of 40. And basically, what we did is that we saw that femtech really was focused on women below, basically in childbearing age, not menopause, not perimenopause, and older. And so we started to do a census about how many people are out there working on this space. And at the time, I like to tell the story, we could find 70 companies. I remember coming back from Europe on a plane, conducting research, and there were 70 companies that we found doing work for women over the age of 40. And ever since then, we introduced a industry segment called FemAging at that time. And now you see everybody talking about menopause. You see them talking about the fact that we need to address these issues. So, we were kind of ahead of the curve with regard to that. So now with FemAging Project, what we saw over the last few years is that women were looking for three things. They were looking for connection, looking for information and insight, and looking for relevant data. And so we decided to launch a platform called Femalytics, which is focusing on delivering all three of those things. So what have I been thinking about? One of the things that's interesting about the data and the platform is there's always serendipity about things that just come up. And I've actually been thinking about issues that impact women's health in a very intimate way, such as toxic tampons. I'm not sure if you've heard of that study where they found 16 toxic metals in tampons. I have
something to tell you about that, which you may not know, but go on.
And I have a young daughter, and I thought, wow, my daughter is about that age where she doesn't use tampons, but she's using pads and other things. And when I saw that study, I thought, okay, that's crazy that could actually happen. And this is not in, a part of the world where they have period poverty and those types of things. This is in the United States and in Europe. So I've been thinking a lot about issues like climate change and women's health and girls. Women and girls are heavily impacted by climate change. And with the recent storms we had in the US, showing that greatly in places like North Carolina, which was devastated, and where that's going to get worse and worse. So I'm juxtaposing that actually on what may happen from a policy perspective, and thinking about, okay, digital tools and women and women's reproductive rights and those types of things. So those are the things that I'm kind of been thinking about, kind of heavy subjects, but I'm actually going to be doing some regular writing for a publication called Femtech World. And one of the first things they wanted was actually the research on companies that are actually working on this problem and have been working on this problem. And quite a few of them are actually run by women of color. Because period poverty and those issues are huge for women of color, and they picked it up and said, "Listen, we're just going to create a company," and they're starting to do quite well. So that's what I've been thinking about, and those are things that honestly, when you hear people talk about femtech, they're not really mentioned much. I mean, how many people are mentioning period poverty, climate change. So really what we're trying to do is we're trying to go beyond the normal conversation as it relates to these issues and bring them to the fore and help educate people and things like that. So that's what I've been thinking about. Heavy issues, but important ones. And like I said, I'm a guy, so people often ask me, why are you focused on this? Well, I have a wife and I have a daughter, and I have a daughter who's a teenager, and I have a younger daughter who's 10, and this is about securing their future. So, the tampon thing really got me because I thought, wow, if my daughter was using that, bad news. So that's what I've been thinking about.
So, but I got to tell you, I know a lot more about this than I did 3 weeks ago because I was working with a group of Korean entrepreneurs who are coming to the US and doing kind of helping them figure out their way in and doing health. And one of them is a group of 4 very young engineers from the sort of Korean MIT, which is like the Korean MIT. And they've actually had exactly this issue. This issue was raised in Korea. The market share of the big tampon companies and period pad companies went down. It was replaced by a bunch of other period pad tampon companies, all of whom equally have microplastics in their things. And these four young women engineers spent 2 years finding a completely organic, but very absorbent solution, of cotton. Like that. They built.
There's even a company using seaweed.
Well,
which is really interesting as well. Yeah.
They've got they literally have been on the market for a year in Korea, and I think they've sold $8 million already. So they came to the States. I mean, I think that there's going to be a big, and Jane, you've been talking about this for years, big revolution in what women in particular think about, putting in their bodies and with their bodies. And so that's great. You also missed Halle Berry talking a lot about some very intimate parts of her life. And, I'm looking at the stage, see health going, oh, it's my favorite Bond girl, but anyway, but she's
partnered with Joylux, who we actually had them early on, early on in some of our pitch competitions back in 2019, with the kind of light therapy, vaginal light therapy. So, Halle Berry, done some interesting. I should also plug my co-founder though, Denise Pines, who just came out with a documentary, the world's first documentary on menopause. And it's currently going gangbusters on PBS. And she's got a lot of people that have been engaged for a long time in this issue. And so I encourage everybody to check that out. That's on PBS. Just came out in October. I feel like I'm on a media junket for her documentary, but it's called M Factor. It's on PBS, your local stations. You can check that out. So that's being filmed around the world now.
That's great, and I think that menopause with MIDI Health getting funded in other companies is really having quite the moment. All right, Jeff. I don't know if you've been looking at what you've been looking at, but what there's been other stuff happening this week too.
Well, yeah, I mean, the pandemic not only nuked the speaking circuit where I lived for 40 years, but it also shortened people's time horizons. So there wasn't a lot of interest in the future. And of course, like right now, the present is so scary and anxiety provoking. You have to go out of ways to find something to feel good about. But last week, a culmination of really a couple months worth of work and reading and gossiping with my scientist friends, I delivered a talk on the year 2035 for WellSpan, a really well put together health system in central Pennsylvania. It's 200 miles north of here. I talked about a couple of big risks, antibiotic resistance and weaponizing the hospital, that is using the hospital as a terrorist tool to kill people, which I think are, these are things we need to be ready to deal with. But the three sort of pluses in the talk, what I call the 3 M's, mRNA, vaccines, for a whole bunch of things, the microbiome, the almost 10 pounds of critters that live with us that aren't human. Our body is sort of like a Star Wars bar scene, and we've managed to cohabit. One of the microbiome folks said, "We never dine alone," which I thought was a marvelous phrase. But the third M, the most obscure, was microglia. I mean, I talk to people and no one has the faintest idea. It's maybe 15% of our brain cells. are these little critters called microglia that for many years, people thought of the non-neurons in our brain as sort of like Excelsior that was kind of there to, keep the neurons from, bumping into one another and, like sort of like packing material. But when we now realize a huge chunk of them are the brain's own immune system, and are intimately involved in maintaining blood flow inside the brain, making sure that pathogens are expelled, eaten and expelled from the brain, and that nerve cells that aren't functioning properly are basically engulfed and devoured. It's the most remarkable story. I mean, we have quite a neuroimmunology crew here at the University of Virginia. There's a center called BIG, which I think stands for Brain Immunology and Glia. And our CEO here put me onto a book called The Angel and the Assassin by Donna Jackson Nakazawa, which the best part for me was the 35 pages of technical notes and citations. So I've spent the last 2 months reading a huge chunk of the papers in the notes section. That's it.
Yay!
It is the most remarkable story. And honestly, a lot of good news here. There seems to be a thread that runs through all of these neurodevelopmental diseases and most mental illnesses that involve the inappropriate functioning of the non-neuron cells in our brain. And the idea that we may be able to communicate with them basically by sending them messages, frequency type messages, to calm them down or to reprogram them or redirect their activity. It's the most remarkable story. And on top of that, there's a huge high bandwidth neural connection between the microbiota in our gut and that brain immune system. It's like this whole thing was there the whole time we were struggling with trying to understand and actually model these illnesses. But in the last 10 years, so much new knowledge has fallen into place. I'm tremendously optimistic about the therapeutic potential of figuring out how to calm those non-neurons down. And I think we're going to get a whole raft of tools to actually cure or prevent by vaccine illnesses like autism and schizophrenia. It's an amazing story. So if you look hard enough, you'll find something to feel good about.
Well, let me try and put all four of those together, which I will probably do badly. But so we have the potential for really understanding the microbiome, the microganglia. I didn't even
Microglia.
I never even heard of that, but I just wait till Robin posts about it on LinkedIn until I find out stuff. That's right. So I'm way behind me. I'm the guy who failed high school science. You know that. We have the potential of these great things. We also know that we have a lot around sort of inflammation and environmental stress that we put on ourselves. If you go back to the issue around microplastics that Kim Bell has written about a lot on THCB, and Fard, you mentioned there as being, as I was mentioning, as being part of period pads and tampons and stuff that we're doing to each other. Obviously, we have at the same time as we're kind of figuring some of this stuff out, how we should do better, we have a couple of other things going on. One is the exposure and the need for mental health and the development of online mental health as potentially a solution for that. But again, we're probably using old style treatments. I would say, I don't know. We're using a mix of therapy and drugs, and the drugs aren't that new and that good and what have you. So I'm wondering if you sort of bump all this stuff together. I know, Robin, you live in many worlds, and AI is part of this to some extent. But if let's spend a few minutes in 2035 or 2040, how different do you think the underlying, illnesses, especially mental health, but of other types of things, will be given the potential developments we have in this? Or is it too soon to say, we'll change everything based on that? How different do we all think that'll be?
I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist, so discount by 85% what I'm about to say, but I don't think these are diseases that are going to be cured by $60,000 to $300,000 drugs that you have to take for the rest of your life. I think there's going to be leverage to affect the physiology here that does not rely in the same way that cancer therapy does on expensive patentable remedies. Again, could be totally wrong about this, but I think there are going to be different pathways to resolving them than our health system is used to. And I also don't think, frankly, these 1,000-bed colossi that we use as temples of medicine are going to be all that helpful. So what I'm hoping is that places like Harvard and the University of Virginia and WashU and some of the other places that are hot on the trail, and UCSF that are hot on the trail of this stuff, are going to be pushing through the scientific knowledge and beginning to test the efficacy of a lot of these strange new therapies, many of which revolve around diet or revolve around stimuli to the nervous system. So I think it's going to unfold in a very different way than we've been very successful. Deaths from strokes are down by 70%, deaths from heart disease are down by 60%, deaths from cancer are down by a third, but at a huge cost. And I'm not sure that's the path that we're going to take to resolve a lot of these neuroinflammatory things.
Well, and I'd add that overall, even though those deaths are down by overall, if you look at subpopulations and overall life expectancy, we're not doing, especially in the US, we're not doing great for a bunch of unrelated reasons, and they may not be quote unquote healthcare reasons.
Might have a little bit to do with that fall in life expectancy.
Sorry, say that again.
Suicides, drug overdoses,
deaths of despair,
interpersonal violence.
Yep.
There's a lot of root causes here that we haven't done a very good job of addressing.
Jane, let me ask you about. Okay, so put your futurist hat on, and go out about what do you think the evolution of mental health looks like, especially given some of the potential treatments that Jeff's talking about with some of the more severe mental illnesses.
Well, to Jeff and Fard's points about climate and food, I'd like to spend a couple minutes diving a little deeper into that, because a wild card, and this is health politics again, for me would be the Chevron doctrine, which came out of the Supreme Court,
right,
and the court's ability to get involved in decisions that experts should make, like doctors and people like Jeff who understand these things, and what Fard understands about women and aging. So we have this issue of clean air, clean water. I grew up in Detroit, so social determinants of health and zip codes were part of how I grew up. Right on the border of 8 Mile, which Eminem talks about and just talked about a couple of weeks ago. So I'm concerned that the opportunity which we have with food, climate, social environment, and loneliness, isolation, looking at 2035, it could go a bunch of different ways depending on technology and love. And I've been talking a lot about how do we use tech to scale love. I did this at a Catholic health system a couple of weeks ago, and the nuns loved it because they're doing tech for virtual care and reaching out to all kinds of people who are alone. So I think this is, as we put on Jeff's and your and my futures hat, the wild cards and the uncertainties, maybe they're not wild cards, are what's going to happen with the food supply. Globally, climate change impacts that, and the quality of food in America. I spend a lot of time in Europe where I source my food fresh every day, very close, 0 kilometer, like very close to where we live in Brussels. We get fresh food, really fresh. And it's really cheap because the government subsidizes our agricultural stuff that we buy, from grains to, and this is post-Ukraine grain prices. Belgium cares. EU generally does that in various EU countries. So, I've lived that life and I live this life in the US, and it's frustrating regarding food especially. So I think we have to think about, as we look to 2035 and these diseases that are amenable, as heart disease and stroke have been, to self-care and things we can do with our physicians and in our homes. What's amenable? How are mental health and these other illnesses amenable to these other things, these external social determinant risks, like food, environment, and heat is a real thing, which is just coming out. And don't have to talk about Valencia, where I was 3 weeks ago, and now the last 2 days. There's these flash floods. So these are crazy things that are real. And we have to, as we look to 2035, think about what we know, what we know we don't know, and then try to influence through public policy and public-private partnerships, impacting what really matters and what works.
No, well said. And I think if there's another area we were talking about, before sort of the intransigence of the mullahs in Iran and how tough it was to change the healthcare system here. And, one of the things that's very tough to change is the agriculture system here. And we have subsidies here probably in the wrong place, right? They don't have high fructose corn syrup even in the Coke and, the processed food over in Europe. And there's a bunch of stuff there. Now, I don't want to get down the RFK Jr. path of saying that all science is bungled, but there is clearly some stuff around nutrition and what we're doing that is not the right thing, which leads us to two things that were heavily featured at Health last week. So I'm happy to talk about one of them, but the other one is AI. So one of them is GLP-1s. I may talk about that in a second, but the other one's AI. So Robin, as your resident AI expert, I want you to lay out AI by 2035, and I've seen some stuff quite interesting. Go a long way into AI and say, how do you think that plays into all of this other stuff we talked about? Because there's a lot there. Just riff a bit for me.
Yep. So in terms of treating diseases with pharmaceuticals, AI for drug discovery combined with digital twins, combined with the technology around tissue engineering, we are going to start to see a massive acceleration in being able to get medications that don't necessarily need to go through the mouse model, because of course, with things like COPD, if we're trying to do a no medication and you do it on a mouse model, mice don't get COPD, right? You have to actually give them the symptoms. And so we are looking at drugs from a symptom standpoint. Mm-hmm. With AI, we're going to start to really be able to accelerate that, as I said, with the tissue engineering component to that as well. And in terms of AI on a personal level, we're all going to have our own AI-based doctors with us 24/7, tracking things that are already, subcutaneous, getting, millions of data points every day on every person, radar on the wall, which is what we're already doing in senior living facilities. And so we have that doctor that's telling us, okay, well, your blood sugar is right, X right now. And so we need you to take a 5-minute walk or what have you, and really just training the individual to be as healthy as they possibly could be and catch things on that really early spectrum, right? With things like full body and full head MRIs done, once a year.
So I guess that the bit that always worries me here is that, I think the tech change if you go back the last 10, 15 years, the tech change that happened clearly, there's a lot going on in the life sciences, but the tech change that we saw was largely on communication, right? And there's been both good and bad come out of that, and we will discuss the Brexit vote and the 2016 Facebook stuff later, possibly, and whether that's repeating itself in the current election, but and whatever is going on with Elon Musk and Twitter and all the rest of it. But it seems to me that we're leaning now towards this combination of AI plus life sciences plus these sort of fundamental life science discoveries and the environmental stuff that we've all raised. I just wonder, if I was to look at from when, God, back 30 years ago when Jane and I met and was starting to talk about how the healthcare system was going to change. We wrote a report on something called CHINs, which Jane remembers well, Community Health Information Networks. In 1994 or 5, and we now have things called QHINs, which are still arguing about the same damn topic. Now, there is more data around, things have progressed, but it hasn't been as fast as it could have been. And I'm wondering if in 10, we say these great things are available in 10 years. Jeff just said, can the current medical palaces deal with the consequences of that? How are we going to, I wonder how we are going to, transfer, how are we going to actually have these things working, that they're available, they're affordable, and that they are actually making changes in 10 years rather than be something that's always going to be 15 years in the future and never quite get there.
So if you look at something like the mRNA vaccines, right, we were able to do that in a day or what have you, and then send it, of course, all over the world. That type of technology is really democratizing the ability to do this, right? It was much cheaper, much faster, much easier. And so it can be available to everybody, and it won't be just the elites. And in terms of, say, that AI doctor that you have 24/7 with all of the preventive meds going on, those already exist. Like, I know of sensors that go subcutaneous that cost pennies to make. And so all of that exists. We just have to piece the puzzle together.
Yep.
With the dramatic dropping in things like, generative AI. 18 months ago, 1 million tokens, which buys about 750,000 words, was $180. Today, it is 75 cents, right? So these drastic drops in price means it can be available to everybody and much more quickly.
Yeah, I saw an amazing talk 2 weeks ago from Michael Harshanori, I think I've got his name right, hopefully, who's a young guy who's running who was running research for Microsoft AI, and they've done a lot of papers with OpenAI and worked on that. And he was just explaining how the rate of increase of new discoveries in AI is changing as you add more computing, add more models, add more power. It's really getting a lot quicker. He had a whole history of how it changed. He didn't have middle out compression or hot dog, not hot dog on his chart. I suggested he would improve if he did that. But anyway,
Jeff. It's interesting. The new NVIDIA Blackwell chip has 208 billion transistors. They're the size of viruses. Our brains have 100 trillion synapses,
right,
which are basically transistors, a sender and a receiver and a base. Well, I think people have made some assumptions about the gap between what machines can and will be able to do now and in 5 years or whatever, and what we have inside us, that I think are frankly pretty laughable. And for all of the miracle of Operation Warp Speed, Donald Trump was booed by his MAGA audiences when he asked them to get vaccinated, and ran at full speed for Donald Trump, 4 miles an hour, I think, away from the miracle of Operation Warp Speed, because a substantial fraction of his audience hate science, hate scientists, hate experts. It's growing. So, the idea that we're going to have all this incredible stuff and it solves all these problems and people are going to want it the day after tomorrow, that's a different country than the one that's in the process of tearing itself apart right now. So I'm not buying Robin's scenario.
I mean, I'm with you. There's a lot of, you've got to be optimistic about what we can do and what will be available. I say I'm with her on the democratization of the vaccine and the technology, and I'm if I think about, I think a lot about this in terms of mental health, where I'm going next week to the BHT conference in Arizona, where last year I had a stand-up shouting match with a bunch of therapists who all told me that there was no way that they'd be replaced by AI anytime soon. And I'm going, we have very few therapists who are being commandeered by these big virtual mental health companies. We have months of waits to access them. And if you could get a CBT generating bot that was in your pocket, which you pretty much can get now, that's available 24/7 and pretty much cheap, I don't see why you should stop people from using it, especially as many of the things that go on in the process of sort of mental health therapy are, can be done, could be done by this. And as you see, you mentioned the video, I was down there a year ago. They already had really convincing avatars who look like humans and sound like humans to me. And I don't see why that will, and many people prefer to deal with them. So I think there are areas where this will go faster. So I'm convinced about that. But I'm with you, Jeff, about, you're not, if you put this in you put this in the 60s, right, when we're in the space race and people are convinced by boffins and eggheads and the country is pulling in one direction. I literally was watching a jokey movie with Scarlett Johansson the other night, which is about that. I forgot the name of the movie already. Not very good for my brain. Anyway, but I mean, it's all about how do you sell the space race to the American people. But in the end, it was a bipartisan thing. It was science. We were going forward. You didn't have the massive kickback that we've had in the last
Well,
sort of
it
half.
tapped into the Cold War. We were going to
Yeah.
defeat the Soviets and prove the massive advantage of our free culture by getting the moon first. I mean, there was a lot of chauvinism.
But there was also, at the time, you could say America's tearing itself up. There was Vietnam, there's a lot of protests, there was 68, there was a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to say that, the concept now that people don't, a lot, and we talked about this many times on THCB Gang, people don't believe in science, or many people don't believe in science. We literally might have a health secretary who doesn't believe in vaccinations. Which we'll talk about that in the second part of the show.
And a White House committed to gutting the CDC and the NIH.
Right.
Not to mention.
How many others?
No, I mean, we're the barbarians are at the gates, guys.
All right, well, that one makes you all feel comfortable. Okay, so let's I mean, I think there's a lot of room for long-term optimism in a lot of the stuff that we've brought on, and it's good to be long-term optimistic, but as you mentioned, there are short-term pressures, and the bigger short-term pressure happens on Tuesday.
Well,
Jeff,
just before we lose the point, 37% of the practicing psychiatrists in the United States are over the age of 65. That's one of, to me, just an absolutely astonishing statistic. And I honestly don't know, maybe Jane does, what we're going to do when all of those folks finally go to Naples and start fishing. I don't think a lot of them are going to be online. So, and there's a lot of primary care disciplines that aren't all that far behind in the high 20s.
Yeah.
So I think we are in the very early stages of what is going to be viewed when people get the 6-month waiting list thing laid on them as a furious public reaction. And I'm not enough of a futurist to be able to forecast how that's going to play out, but it's going to place tremendous pressure on every element of our health system. And the mental health, I mean, I'm with you, Jane. I mean, there really was a revolution here. I mean, we dramatically expanded access to mental health services at a time when people really needed them. And if we haven't learned our lesson, that was really a very important thing to do, God help us.
Amen.
But with the there's already a 4-month delay most of the time to get into specialists, right? So we're already at that 6-month, close to that 6-month thing, and no one's revolting.
Yes, but how long does it take to become a scandal, and then for people to begin looking for who to blame, and then some people behind the scenes going, okay, and here's the 2 or 3 things that we could do. Maybe AI is one of those things to help fix it. So there's sort of like the Kubler-Ross thing. We're going to go through a Kubler-Ross-like process about this absolutely self-inflicted shortage of clinicians. And that's where AI comes in, because if we can use AI to manufacture clinical capacity by eliminating a lot of the stupid stuff that people with MD, PhDs shouldn't be spending 30 seconds on, maybe there's a shortcut to the solution. So that's an area where I am really optimistic. I don't know if it's ambient listening, pajama time goes away, but I think
an AI bot.
There are ingredients of a solution here.
Let me ask Fard about it before we go to the politics. Let me ask Fard about this, because I think this is happening right now in what you picked up on, right? Menopause. So 20-ish years ago, I forget exactly when it was, we had a bunch of studies that apparently were wrong, basically saying that one study.
Yep.
What the treatment of menopause changed dramatically for the worse, right? For many women. And we have not, one of the things that I was talking to Joanna Strober at MIDI, who's raised a lot of money. I said too much and she got grumpy with me to deal with this, but to build basically a online specialty care clinic for menopause for midlife. And if you noticed, all the fertility companies like Carrot and others and
Low Health,
they're all going there too, right? They're all saying that this is the next big thing, right?
Yep.
But we have there a massive shortage of people who were trained kind of the right way to do it. So Fard, tell me a bit about what's going on in that world and how you think that what the reaction of that group of patients, has been to this. I mean, you seeing the sort of anger that Jeff's forecasting, or and how is the supply side dealing with this?
You mean in terms of menopause and issues related to that,
Yeah,
or just
I mean,
yeah,
women who
yeah.
basically had been told to grin and bear it for however many years.
Yeah, well, one of the things I always like to mention in terms of the research that we've done is the number one thing that people were talking about, women were talking about when looking at health issues was sleep and stress. Hot flashes were lower down on the list. But sleep and stress were the tremendously huge issues that people were focused on. And the other issue, if you look across the pond, to the UK, where menopause is kind of being institutionalized. There's government bodies that are focusing on it. There's a consumer effort to get labeling on products and related to menopause. There's a focus on decreasing the productivity losses associated with menopause and not managing it. And so if you think about like how things are adopted over a time period, we're talking about 2035, and we're talking about pressures related to anti-science and things like that. I like to think about I know you mentioned the weight loss drugs, right? So remember, 15 years ago, we were talking about weight loss and we were talking about apps. We were talking about, lifestyle change. We're talking about behavior change, all kinds of things. Now you have this drug, right, that you can just give somebody and they lose 30 pounds or whatever it is. And those are being adopted tremendously across all kinds of populations because it's cheaper to give people the pill and let them use that and lose weight and reduce all kinds of outcomes. So when I think about
Not
technology,
as cheap as it should be, but that's a separate issue. Go on.
yeah, I mean, but that's kind of the ideal. But when I think about AI and technology and those types of things, the thing about AI that I think people, and Robin, you're aware of this, you mentioned this with the tokens. The integration of AI into solutions that are traditionally like more data focused or have other capabilities, but then they put AI into one part of it, right? So it's not driving the whole thing, but it makes it more efficient. So a lot, when you think about why the tokens are decreasing in cost, OpenAI, why they're valued at crazy amounts of money, it's because it's going to be integrated into these solutions in ways that you don't even recognize that enhance the solution as opposed to replacing the solution. So when you think about, ambient AI, scribes, all kinds of things, those are the ways that I think we should be thinking about AI in terms of its adoption, is where it's not going to be forward AI, it's going to be enhanced with AI. And then when we talk about adoption of various across various populations and those types of things, I almost like to think about the health crisis and mental health crisis like people are thinking about climate change. So climate change, there's people who denied climate change, it doesn't exist, all these types of things. And then it kicked them in the, excuse my French, it kicked them in the ass where, floods, hurricanes, you got 6 hurricanes in Florida. You got people who have to move out of their homes. They can't afford to pay for insurance. All of a sudden, people who are saying this stuff doesn't exist, it's hitting them in the pocketbook. So that's forcing people to adopt and recognize that they have to do things to either eliminate this or reduce this risk, or else they're not going to have a place to live. So even though there is an anti-science and anti-establishment and anti-expert, the interesting thing is that what these issues are becoming so dire that you have to practice cognitive dissonance to ignore them. And I think across the political spectrum, you have to deal with it. Otherwise, you're going to have civil unrest. You're going to have all kinds of things that are just problematic for people of every political persuasion. So when I think about 2035, I think in terms of where we're going to be, I'd say mass dislocations because of climate, people moving out of these places. So that's going to change the character of the country and the character of the world. I think there's going to be more isolationism and countries dealing with issues on their own because of pressures related to migration and climate change and dealing with these issues. So I do think that these solutions are going to be certainly adopted, but the biggest concern I think people are going to have is about surveillance technology and interlocking political issues with data and health. And we're already seeing that right now with Roe v. Wade and how fertility companies have been impacted. Like one of the reasons you ask, why is, Flo and Mitty and all those folks going after menopause? There's an economic reason for it. It's because you can't do fertility right now in certain parts of the country because you're concerned about data access and people being targeted if they're pregnant. And so that's one of the reasons, I hate to say it, that's causing a bit of this transformation, because their business model has been impacted.
Yep.
And now they're moving to an area where that's not really going to be an issue. So when I think about, those issues that, it's going to be cross currents like it always is, but I always like to go back to fundamentals. And I think those are some of the fundamentals that might have an impact on how these things are adopted, whether adopted, things like that. So that's my thought about, 10 years from now. It's going to be pretty crazy. But it's going to be interesting to see how people react to it and what technologies and how people shift because of these changes. So, and we've seen policy impact technology, and that's the reason you're seeing $25 million raises for MIDI Health, these huge raises, because, menopause is safe. Business model perspective, you can't be targeted from an abortion perspective with that stuff. So I hate to say it, but that's a big driver.
I must
That's
admit,
a big driver.
I hadn't thought about it that way, but dead right. All right, we only have a relatively small amount of time left, and we are going to have to, I hate to say it, it's been fun living in 2035. We're going to talk about 2024, especially the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th November onwards, until we find out what exactly happened. So quick go around. I will tell you, I looked at the polling this morning. I looked at Real Clear Politics, which is generally regarded as a Republican site. It had where we were 4 years ago, 5 days out 4 years ago, and 8 years ago. And in both cases, the Democrats were well ahead in all the battleground states. Now they're ahead in a couple of them, but they're behind, allegedly, according to them, they're either even or very close. And my comment here is, I don't know who's going to win. I don't think anybody knows, but I don't understand a couple of things. One is that if you look at what's called the misery index, which is you add out inflation and unemployment together, it's the lowest it's ever been. It's the best it's ever been. Right? So theoretically, the economy and the stock market is all in tremendous shape. I know we have a hangover from inflation and who was to blame for inflation and how much was this Biden's fault and all the rest of it. But I still don't understand the pessimism or the idea that, that the Democrats are terrible for the economy. The second thing is, I don't know what people would have seen over the last 4 or even 8 years to change their mind, compared to what happened last time. And we've had pretty consistent, votes in favor of the Democrats. You go back to 18, 20, and then 2022. Obviously they lost the House in 22, but they did kind of better than they thought they would do. So I guess I'm stuck here going, what happened? Now, Jeff, you wrote a piece about this a while back as to what was going wrong and why Biden was going to lose, essentially. Perhaps I get
I didn't say that. I mean, I just said they'd done an atrocious job of addressing how much they had done to help the places in the country, 90% of whom voted for Trump, that were shrinking in population.
And if you look at
they put $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion of our grandchildren's money to work in places that hadn't had new factories or whatever it was, you still didn't hear about it from Harris. You didn't hear about it. So it's sort of like, what was the point of doing it if it wasn't to provide some hope that these communities could grow again and could, give people a reason to stick around?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's back to your, Andy Sandy, whatever crowd. If Biden talked a lot about building the economy from the middle out and the bottom up and the middle out, and and talking about getting unions back in America and all that kind of good stuff. It doesn't seem to have moved. I mean, moved the needle from where he was anyway. What I'm wondering is, do we regress back, or go back to where we were?
Bill Clinton there was a brilliant article and on Clinton about a week ago, where he basically said, he answered your question. He said, maybe it isn't about the money. People just aren't feeling it. And I thought that was I'm not a big Bill Clinton fan. I thought he was kind of a charlatan, but I think he was sort of onto something. Is there something deeper behind all of this anger than, the gas prices or, the price of eggs or whatever? A culture that's kind of run out of nutrients, that isn't sustaining people emotionally and mentally and in a lot of other ways. And, that's not something that fits into a campaign ad very well. Here, we're going to fix this. We're going to do the following 5 things. Here's our 10-point program. That's not it at all. I think our culture has run out of gas. And I think a lot of this energy is a huge number of people, both on the left and the right, feel disrespected, feel that they're not valued, that their experience doesn't matter. And that's a big chunk of what's going on now, and not just on the Republican side of the aisle. It's kind of a spiritual and emotional bankruptcy in process. And I don't think our political system is going to fix it. And I don't think this election cycle is going to fix it either.
No, I mean, I think at the end of this, you're going to have, a very divided country and a lot of emotion on both sides, as you have now, right? It hasn't gone away. And I don't know how much of this is connected to the Trump.
An additional point, Matthew,
Yeah, go on.
is it's happening in Britain. It's happening in France. It's happening in Germany.
Yes.
This is not just a United
Not
States
to the extent it's
centric.
happening here, though.
Oh my
Not
God.
to the
look at
extent where
Italy.
you have a 50% of the population voting for what's basically an authority. I don't know, we're going to call him fascist or whatever, but very authority, as his chief of staff as.
Look at Marine Le Pen, for God's sake.
But she's at 30% of the vote, not 50%. I would argue.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, I would.
So, Fard.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think one of the things that we have to remember also is the inflation thing is a really, really, really big deal. And, one of the mistakes that the Biden administration made was downplaying that for a long period of time. And now the inflation situation wasn't Biden's fault specifically. It was related to the pandemic. And I think if you look at the numbers, but there were some things that he did to kind of not address it as well. I think one of the issues, so that had a big impact on people's pocketbooks, and they went to the store every day and they saw the price of their, not only prices going up, but shrinkflation, where you buy something and then you get half of it, and you still have half of it. You had gas prices spiking. You had, period of time, for a long period of time during the administration, you had these huge price spikes. And for a little bit of time, the administration was kind of denying it. I think the other problem with the race is that the switch to Vice President Harris wasn't enough of a break for people, I think, because she's still connected to the policies and what happened during the Biden administration. So she's a new face on an old package. She didn't really come out, I think, as forcefully as she could have, looking at her speeches and things like that, to differentiate herself from what happened during the Biden administration. So it's not like, you're looking at her like an Obama type person, who Obama was like, wow, this guy's completely new. Not at all seems like he's part of the establishment, and he got a gain from that. But Vice President Harris, she's coming from the same cloth of an administration that's been around for 4 years. And that's hard to communicate to people that that's a change.
I get that,
yeah.
but I mean, as Jeff said, a lot of stuff got done. You may not love it, but a lot of very positive, actual things happen, right? We had industrial policy, we did stuff, they did bring down,
I agree. I mean, I know this, but I think there's a lot of people that don't pay attention. They just look at the cost of how much their food costs, or how much their healthcare costs, and they say, well, am I better than I was 4 years ago when that stuff was a bit cheaper? And they look at that and say, yeah, and they say, well, do I want more of that for 4 years? And they say, no. So, I mean, if you look, certainly in terms of Trump, distasteful, I think people would agree he's not there's a lot of things there. But I think when I talk to people who are kind of on that side, they kind of say, I don't really like him, but I like things that he represents, for whatever the reason is. And so that's the reason that I think I try to understand why people are for that. So yeah, Biden accomplished a lot. There's a lot that was accomplished in the Biden administration. I think that's undeniable. I think the issue is lack of communication about what the successes were. Tremendous problem. Clinton did a good job at doing that. He really did a good job communicating, if you think about that. Obama did a better job as well. But the Biden administration hasn't done as good of a job. And I think Harris has had trouble in the short period of time that she's had to differentiate herself from that and communicate what she's going to do different than the previous 4 years. And so I think that's an overhang. And I just think it has to be acknowledged.
Jane?
So that's my thought.
Jane?
Yeah. So women. All I can think about, aside from mental health, is women. And from Mental Health Matters, vote like your mental health depends on it. I wrote the other day about the American Psychological Association's Stress in America survey, which I cover twice a year, and about political stress, which is a real thing. And that also has to do with sleep, which is why I wear an Oura ring. Because Fard, to your point about sleep and stress, I had to hack through menopause without you. So you're too late for me. But in any case, women, women, women. I disagree with the focus on inflation totally. I live in the state of Pennsylvania in Chester County, right here. We are key to getting the Pennsylvania Electoral College. My husband is working 24/7 with Chesco Dems, I will admit. And that's one reason we're home the fourth quarter of the year in the US, to see through next Tuesday, because we are concerned, to Jeff's point. I think the anomie, this feeling that people have on the right, the left, and the center, we have this lag from COVID. I think it is PTSD. I journal every day. I already have our picture in my journal. I print it out. Scream, quote, repeat. I journal for my mental health. I have stickers about Trump and Kamala from companies who create these things. This is a business. Let me just say, and I want Robin to chime in. My husband, who's a banker, but he's really a historian by training, we've been rereading the letters from Abigail Adams to her husband. And if you go back, maternal mortality was 40 times likely when you were having a baby back then. And it's like this deja vu, although, because we got this problem now with kids in Texas dying, babies dying post-Dobbs. This is a real thing. So I think you're going to see women who were Republican in my county, women I know, who aren't telling their husbands who they're voting for. And this is going to be a phenomenon in some places. But I think it's going to be women who turn out in big numbers and a lot of other people who may not, because of enthusiasm. So yes, crossing fingers, obviously, health is politics, and I'm an economist, and economics is political. So in any case, I think watch the women and Abigail Adams and young Barbara Bush coming out. Yep. So the granddaughter of Abigail Adams' compadre, Barbara, the only other woman in America who has been associated with 2 U.S. presidents, like Abigail Adams. I will leave it there.
Robin, what are you watching for, worrying, thinking, guessing? And then I'm going to go around and make everyone say what they think is going to happen.
I voted last week already. I'm in California, so I did the absentee. I walked it over to City Hall, which is just a couple blocks away, and I already got the email saying it's been counted. But for the first time in my entire life, I voted very, very confidently in 100% of the issues. And the way I did this, because most of the time you're like, prop what? Like, who is this person and that person in these little tiny elections? I went to u.com, which is my favorite of the generative AI kind of ones that plug into about 5 or 6 different Gen AI companies. And I said, I'm a Democrat. I live in Palo Alto. Who should I be voting for between X and Y? And it came back with like a full paragraph on each one and say, this might be someone you'd like better, and here are the reasons. And so for the first time, I filled out 100% of my ballot with pure confidence.
I love it. We're going to just have the AI vote for us be much better. the robots like us. I do have
overlords.
I do have 3 things I got to say, right? So one is, there was George Halverson wrote a piece on this on THCB, and I've been ranting forever, Robin, so let me see, Fard, you live in New York, right? Or I forget where you live now, is New York.
And, New York, yeah.
Yep. Jane, you can come back, your votes matters. I mean, I don't know why George Soros hasn't paid for like 400,000 people to move from other states and register and pretend they live in Pennsylvania for like the previous 4 weeks into just to register, because it would be no less ridiculous than what we have now, which is if you live in a few places, it matters. And if you live in California or to some extent Virginia or New York, your vote
New York, California, you're like
your vote doesn't matter.
Bystanders. We're bystanders.
We're bystanders.
You know.
This thing is going.
Well, we could get involved certainly,
Right.
but
If you
yeah,
look at
but
the
yeah.
if you look at the polls, the big four states, right? Florida and Texas are relatively close, but they're going to go Republican. California and New York, which are the two biggest states, are massively in favor of Harris. She's going to win the popular vote again easily, right? So this, if Harris loses, if Trump wins, it's going to be another, yet another version where the most Americans voted for the other one, right? And we've had that now. That'll be now by the third time if that happens. That's one thing. Second thing is that I implore you all to have some fun. Watch Triumph, the insult comic dog, outside the MS, the Madison Square Garden rally. He had this amazing line, which I love, which they were talking about illegal immigration and Americans, people coming in and ruining the economy. And he said, yes, it's true. And this goes back to somebody Jane, your husband, worked with many, many years ago. He said, one illegal immigrant managed to get, took over Twitter and 6,000 Americans lost their jobs. I love that line. Let me prove that. And the third thing, which is very true, and I know this is why Harris has been going at it, is that if you look at why Clinton lost, it was particularly black male turnout in the cities of Detroit, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. And I know they're on the ground trying to work on that, and that turnout matters, and all this stuff about calling Puerto Rico garbage and all this stuff. You don't know how that's going to change this in the last things, but it is down to the point where it was 45,000 votes over 3 states last time, and 60,000 votes over those same 3 different states the time before, and it's a ridiculous way to run a country. Especially one that is this important. But I would say, as the guy in the group who did political science, at Cambridge University, and my study of early 20th century fascist movements in Europe, is they come quickly, they hang around for a while, and they are usually very dominated by one leader. And I don't know what happens to the particular cult of Trump if he goes, whether Vance or somebody else can pick up the mantle. We have this massive disaffection, no question. But the Republican Party changed pretty quickly from George Bush's party, where, it was the Bush-Cheney kind of corporatist neocon thing, keeping these radical people undercover. And then they came out in a big way and have basically blown away the rest of the Republican Party. And now the Cheneys are on the other. Dick Cheney and me are voting on the same side. I mean, come on. Right. So,
yeah.
To me, it's
strange bedfellows.
Strange bedfellows,
to say the least.
Because that party has become a neocon, neo-fascist, whatever you want to call it, party compared to where it was. And the rest of the conservatives don't know. Jeff.
I drove from Charlottesville due north to central Pennsylvania last week and counted yard signs right through the reddest part of Virginia and up into the red part of Pennsylvania. And my sign count, I expected it to be 75% Trump. It was 30-28 Harris.
Whoa. Well, maybe
that's my N equals 1 sampling of the guts of the redneck part of our state.
And speaking of somebody who worked for a polling company, and Jane, you and I work closely with Harris, polling has collapsed, right? No one knows how to do it. We do know there's a very high proportion, it's all a turnout game. And last time in 2020, we had a very, very high, the turnout was like in the low 60s. It was like a bad turnout in a British election.
This is going to be higher.
And I think the higher it gets, you start hitting more and more groups who are more likely to be Democratic. But I mean, I'm going to ask you guys, who's going to win? I think Jeff just said that he thinks Harris is going to win.
I don't know who's going to win.
Anyone think they know? We're all hoping.
I think it's going to be like a week before we know who won.
Well,
at least a week and a half, 2 weeks, maybe.
Well, it was
with all the lawsuits. With all the lawsuits.
The lawsuits are all bullshit. I think it was 4 days last time before they actually said there was a count enough. I don't know.
I've seen more than one analyst that have said that there is a 60% likelihood that it's a blowout. One way.
Wow.
One
way or the other.
That it's a 300. That one of the 2 candidates gets 300 electoral votes.
I mean,
I've seen that in more than one place.
And it's very clear that Harris could do that easily. Could do that relatively easy. Either one could do it easily, and Biden did that last time. The one thing I would say is that I know there's a wacky Senate race going on in Oklahoma. No, it's
North Carolina.
Nebraska, where there's like an independent who might end up caucusing, who's having a real go, but looks like the Democrats, they're probably going to lose Montana and have got to hold all the rest of them. But if you look at the polling, for what it's worth, just polling wasn't worth anything. Almost all those Democratic senators who are incumbents are ahead in their respective states. I think Michigan is an open seat, but I think Nevada, Nevada, where have I see? Where there's a few others. I'm trying to blank on. Michigan, Nevada, Wisconsin. Where else is there? Ohio, even, which is not even close in terms of the national race now. So, it's going to be a bit weird, but it does look like they'll lose the Senate. So then you've got to wonder what happens in the House, right? Because it's a very different world for healthcare and everything else. If we lose, if the Democrats lose the House or don't get the House back, which you think they probably should do in this year, but if the Republicans keep the House, have the Senate, or at least have the Senate tied and have the White House, then it's then we're all in the camp. Well, I get very worried, and I live with 2 young Hispanic adults. I am damn worried about that. I think that could be, they're not shying away from that talk, right? The whole Puerto Rican's the garbage.
This is one area, and I mean, we're going over time here, but Jane mentioned the Chevron decision earlier.
Yep.
The Chevron decision will cripple the Trump administration just as it would cripple a Harris administration by basically saying, you don't have the statutory authority to do it, you can't do it. So
I agree with
it's
that.
far from clear that even narrow majorities by either one of these folks in both houses means that the president can do whatever he wants. That's just not what Chevron says at all.
Yeah,
and that was Trump's court that said that.
That
was a power play by the judiciary. I think the judiciary feels like they're the only branch that works.
It's a really good point.
They're like, we're just going to do it. Congress doesn't work. Presidency doesn't work. We're just going to do it.
We'll see.
We'll make the decisions.
We'll see if Trump wins and gets that one switched back. We'll see. All right, we've gone over time.
Right.
We just lost Robin. I will just say that we will know much more in a week, even if we don't know everything. You have been listening to on the THCB gang, my colleagues, Jeff Goldsmith from the wilds of Virginia. Robin, we just lost Robin Farmanfarmaian, but from Palo Alto, California. Jane Sarasohn-Kahn back from Brussels to Pennsylvania to help us along, hopefully, with the only vote on the panel that matters. And Fard Johnmar from New York and Film Aging. That was THCB Gang for October the 31st. We'll be back next week. I believe I'm back on Friday after the election, where we'll discuss. Hopefully, we'll know something by then. And as Jeff said, it may not change that much, but certainly potentially might change a lot. You've been listening to Matthew Holt. I'm the host of THCB Gang. Thanks for your time, and we will see you next week.